seconds. Hello, everyone. I'm Shobna Jori Verma, the Executive Director of the South Asian American Policy and Research Institute, SAAPRI. I would like to welcome and thank you all for joining us today or later at your own convenience if you're unable to tune in live to discuss why election protection is crucial for maintaining the integrity of the democratic process and ensuring that all voters can participate freely and safely. We will also talk about combating disinformation and misinformation, which is key to fostering an informed electorate. Today's panel is the final event of our three-part Get Out the Youth Vote 2024 series as we enter the final stretch before the November 5 general elections. SAAPRI is pleased to partner with the North American South Asian Law Students Association and the South Asian Legal Defense Fund to educate and engage voting eligible South Asian Americans by bringing in experts like Ami Gandhi from the Chicago Lawyers Committee, Max Beaver from the Chicago Board of Election Commissioners, and Dr. Jordan Stalker from DePaul University, and who is also a member of the SAAPRI team. I would now like to hand it over to my co-host Simi Patel and today's moderator Shivani Parikh to introduce themselves and our guest speakers. Take it away, Simi and Shivani.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Simi Patel. I am the president of the North American South Asian Law Students Association, and I'm a 3L at UIC Law. Again, thank you all so much for being here. I know my board really appreciates you guys taking time out of Also, I'll just ask all non-panelists and moderators to keep their cameras off and keep themselves muted, just so we can spotlight the speakers, because this will be going up on the NASALSA website as well as the SAAPRI and South Asian Legal Defense Fund websites. Thank you.
Great. And it's so lovely to be here. My name is Shivani Parikh, and I'm the Executive Director of the South Asian Legal Defense Fund. And I passed the bar last Wednesday. So I'm very excited to officially be a part of our profession. Thank you. Thank you. And I'm based out of New York City. And I'm going to actually, I think we'll just sort of go in the order of my screen. So maybe, Ami, you could share about yourself first, Jordan, and then Max, and then I'll build our way into the questions that we have prepared so you can all begin sharing with us your wisdom. So, Ami, if you'd like to introduce yourself first.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ami Gandhi. My pronouns are she, her. I lead the Midwest Voting Rights Program of a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization called Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. And I'm looking forward to getting into the discussion with you all.
Thank you so much. Jordan, please feel free to jump in.
Thanks so much. My name is Jordan Stalker, and I am an adjunct instructor at DePaul University. And I'm also a communications and research advisor to SAAPRI. And I'm excited just to share, what I know about, the community and the overall concerns of mis and disinformation with all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm Max Bever. I'm the Director of Public Information for the Chicago Board of Elections. This will be my 6th election at the board. Before I joined the board, I was at the American Civil Liberties Union of Illinois. I've lived in Lincoln Square for over 10 years now and been a Chicagoan for 22. And I appreciate the invite today.
Lovely. And so for us to begin, I think it can be helpful for us to contextualize the issues that we're seeing. And so I'm going to start each question that I also ask, I'm going to post it in the chat just for everyone's convenience on the panel and then others who are in the Zoom. So the first question is for Ami. From your experience at the Chicago Lawyers Committee, what are the most prevalent election protection challenges you've been seeing in 2024, particularly within marginalized communities?
Thank you, Shivani, and thanks for the chance to be here with you all. I am an alum of SAAPRI, and so really appreciate all of the work that SAAPRI and other organizations do in our South Asian American community and beyond. And keeping in mind that people may be watching the recording, law students or others from other parts of the country, not just the Midwest, I'll kind of try to keep that in mind as well, even though my work is more Midwestern focused and particularly on Illinois and Indiana. And when we receive calls and in-person questions in my current role at Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, they are a huge range of different kinds of issues that voters have. And many times people are looking for more information, and we do see more informational type of questions with pretty clear, discrete answers in a high turnout election, in a presidential general election, for example, as compared to when there are smaller scale elections, we sometimes have a higher proportion of certain kinds of problems like intimidation or poll worker misconduct or other issues like that. And so just with the sheer number of people looking to participate this election, which is a great thing, we have a high volume, people who call our nonpartisan voter protection hotline 866 Our Vote and the companion language lines, including 888 API Vote and others, are many times people who are asking about how, when, and where to register to vote, how to locate their polling place, how to better understand issues happening in the polling place, such as a question, or it may have been a problem, or it may be a mere question about some type of voting equipment, for example, or voting procedure, what ID they may need to have on them to register or to vote, or other sorts of proof or documentation. And they may have questions about particular barriers that they faced at the polls as well, and I'll talk about that later. But in a general sense, the election system can be confusing for people, especially if they're new in interfacing with election systems, or if they've had a recent move or they're newly eligible to vote. There are basic aspects about the election system that people want to know more about. And so that's the bulk of what we face, and people calling us is they may not even really be completely sure what their question is, and that's okay. It's very understandable if they're not stating the question in a way that's using specific legal jargon. I mean, I don't blame anyone. And we hope to just hear the voter out who we're talking to over the phone or in person, and really try to stay focused on how to help them gain access to be able to vote and have their vote counted. And we're nonpartisan, so we don't get into conversations with them about who they're voting for or anything like that. But we do want to help them so that they can vote. And we do have a focus as a racial justice organization working to advance racial equity and economic opportunity. We do have a focus on some of the specific issues facing communities of color. And so we do run into questions about people's rights if they're a citizen, but they're still in the process of learning English, for example. We face questions along those lines. We also face questions from people in the criminal legal system, whether it's eligible voters in pretrial detention or eligible voters with past criminal records, given that our carceral systems are disproportionately Black and brown. So that gives you some flavor of the types of issues that we work on. But I do want to say many people have a successful voting experience. Many people have a positive, enthusiastic voting experience. Even many of the people who call us with issues, they're so motivated to exercise their right to vote that they want to see through the process and overcome any sorts of confusion or barriers they may be facing. So most people actually will have a positive, successful experience voting. And we celebrate that. We thank our hardworking election authorities and election officials for all of their dedication to make that possible. You'll hear me talking about when something's gone wrong, because those are the questions we invite. You know, we try to be there as civil rights attorneys and advocates. We try to be there for those segments of the community facing those issues, but that's not representative of everyone's experience, of course.
Thank you so much. I think that actually segues nicely into another angle by which elections happen, which is through Max's work. So Max, as an election administrator, what role do you or does your agency as a whole, with the Chicago Board of Election Commissioners play in maintaining the trust of the public and ensuring that elections are fair and transparent? Many of us remember that in the 2020 election, it took us quite some time to know the results because of many recounts in Georgia. And so I think that plays into many of us as citizens, concerns as we go off into the future after next Tuesday. And so, yeah, how have these challenges evolved over the years?
Well, thanks. It's a very good question. And I'm glad that Ami went first because I think that she described very well the complicated nature of election law and the many different messengers that have to be out there talking to different communities. Because I will say at the Chicago Board of Elections, we are a small but mighty government agency. We've got under 180 full-time employees, but we're serving 1.5 million registered voters. So it's just the truth of the matter is we can't do this alone. And that's why we're so grateful for our partnerships with community organizations and nonprofits that are nonpartisan, like SAAPRI and the Chicago Lawyers Committee, because we need more eyes in our community and people bringing attention issues to our attention as they're going on. Because most importantly, we need to be consistently reporting accurate election information to our communities. And that's what we're running up against in 2024. And that's what we ran up against in 2020. There is a very sophisticated misinformation efforts that have gotten louder, and technology has been advancing exponentially, especially when it comes to AI and deepfakes. I know those are topics we're going to cover. But for the most part, most questions, most concerns that we deal with are not in bad faith. It's somebody who wants to cast a ballot, has a question. They might be anxious, they might be nervous, or there's so many different laws sometimes you have to follow, especially if you're voting by mail. How do I fill out my ballot return envelope? These are all good questions. And we need the extra support that we have from our community organizations and our nonprofits because we need to reach as many people as possible and help as many people as possible. So we rely on these relationships and are grateful for them, but we have to do the work at the Chicago Board of Election too. This is why we really try to put the elbow grease into meeting regularly with our community groups. This is why we really work together on different efforts. And this is why we have an open communication channel that's not confrontational. There are issues that go on election day. There are issues that go on early voting and with vote by mail that need to come to our attention, that we have that trust between the Chicago's Lawyers Committee when they're taking these issues to us that we can really get to work on it, that we have these additional sources that are coming our way. So we have this awareness because in a year like a presidential election, it's a fire hose right now. The amount of people that are voting, the lines that are out there, this is all good news when we see voter turnout get to these numbers, especially when we look at municipal and midterm elections where we're seeing 38% or only 45% of the city to turn out to vote. Good, strong voter turnout is important, but we want to make sure that we're nipping any issues in the bud. And this is exactly why we try to work as closely as we can with our organizations, have regular bi-monthly meetings, and have a trusting relationship with each other to communicate with each other.
Great. No, that's really important to build into. And I adjusted one of our questions later so we can loop back to the AI and deepfake conversation. And so this allows us, I think, to talk about getting grounded in specifics. And so, Jordan, no doubt, in addition to being an advisor for SAAPRI, you may have insight into the way that this election is panning out in terms of the internal conversations in different ethnic and predominantly non-English speaking immigrant communities as a whole. So what specific barriers to voter engagement or participation have you observed or have you been advising SAAPRI on? And how does this mis or disinformation exacerbate these barriers?
Sure, thanks so much. And happily, in one sense, the things that I've noticed are the things that both Ami and Max brought up, because when I teach about communication, think about communication, and democracy cannot function without that. And if you cannot feel confident in your vote, cannot feel confident in what you are doing, then you're not going to participate. And so one of the things that I've noticed is that the concerns of the South Asian American community in particular, and recognizing that South Asian Americans are in fact a community of color and are a community period, is that there is a significant lack of accurate, trustworthy information. And so without access to that kind of information, you don't know what is true. And in those cases, many people are then reluctant to participate at all. And so I would say that one of the biggest barriers for the South Asians and community in general is a lack of relevant information. And this goes beyond things like deep fakes. It goes just what is being covered. So there's plenty of information or data about the presidential nomination and presidential campaigns, but there's less and less reliable, consistent coverage of local, municipal, smaller scale elections that might actually impact the day-to-day citizen's life more. And so without that information, people are reluctant to step in, and that then complicates any kind of misinformation or disinformation effort and ways to alleviate those things. And I think going back to 2020, just the idea that this Asian American community and South Asian community is a part of that, of course, was a target and was some kind of a generator for a lot of misinformation about public health with COVID-19 and elections. And because that was a known entity, that encouraged outside interlopers to figure out that this community is susceptible. And so if you're already kind of unsure how to participate, if you are a newly arrived American, if you are a new citizen, you're already confused about where to go and what questions to ask, as both Max and Ami mentioned, you can be very susceptible to the things that are going to, again, prevent you and disenfranchise you from participating in the electoral process. And within the South Asian American community, too, back home, right, in South Asia in general, there's lots of opportunities for misinformation, disinformation, and citizenship disenfranchisement. And so those things are compounded and brought over and brought here, not only talking about and with relatives back in South Asia, but that kind of mentality, that kind of miseducation is what often they bring to American politics as well. And another thing is just thinking about, again, South Asians and immigrants in particular, is what information we have available to us is confusing. So the terms we use, the actual things that would be done if this candidate or that candidate would become elected, what would happen? And so if that ideas and talking points are confusing, then again, another opportunity for misinformation, disinformation, and fundamentally disenfranchisement. And so based on what we do with SAAPRI, trying to engage the community, find out where they are, what things they know, so that they can feel encouraged and empowered to participate in some way in a democratic process like voting.
Thank you. I think this actually allows us to now give people a sense of what they can potentially anticipate or some of the issues that have already been raised. And so, Max, can you walk us through the board's approach to mitigating misinformation during election cycles? And what are some of the most common types of misinformation you've encountered, given that in 2020, we did see deep fakes. But in terms of the role of AI, most of us as lay people at most are only exposed to it through something like Chat GPT. But the way that it could be used for our election might be, beyond the scope of things we can guess at.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is certainly the topic of the day. And I know a lot of attention is on AI and deep fakes and what is reaching voters out there. And unfortunately, there's little that election authorities can do about that. We're not in a position to clarify candidate statements. We're not going to get involved with candidates and campaigns that way. But I think what's really at the heart of what's most dangerous about mis and disinformation efforts is that it's getting people the wrong information. And it's targeting a lot of wrong election information. This is what you see. Thankfully, we don't see these type of threats or issues in Chicago comparatively to a lot of our friends in other election jurisdictions, but text message campaigns that say a wrong polling place, or telling college students that they can't register at their dorm address like they're seeing in Wisconsin. These are the type of common things that we're seeing across the country that are very dangerous for voters. Now, this is another thing that's been added a little bit to the election authorities' plate, which is get out there in the community and communicate to people and fight back against mis and disinformation. And that is something we take seriously. But there's also the question of, if you're supposed to trust your election authority and the line goes, like, get all of your information from your election authority, they're the most accurate information, they'll be able to help you. And that is true. But what happens if you're somebody who doesn't trust elections? What happens if you're someone who already doesn't trust an election authority or the Chicago Board of Elections. Well, this is where we need to really put more effort, and we have throughout this year, into working with our community organizations and other government agencies to work together to fight back and to offer people voting machine demonstrations where they can get up close to how our touchscreens work, ask their questions, see how chain of custody works, see how security seals work. And that's something that we did with our partners over at the League of Women Voters of Chicago, as well as Chicago Libraries. We put together 3 different presentations that also came with presentations by academics, with former journalists, people who could speak to broader topics rather than just the election stuff. So I can go there with a team member from our community service. We can do a voting machine demonstration. We can answer everybody's questions about chain of command. But then there are former journalists there that are talking about the larger scope, how to spot misinformation within the media, how to verify when it comes to that information that's out there. And that's what we're really trying to work together to show people first how to recognize mis and disinformation, and then also how they can start reporting it and getting back to social media companies and other people to take that down. And so a lot of the focus we've had throughout this year, because this is the first presidential election since 2020, misinformation has been around a very long time, but certainly sophisticated efforts have ramped up since 2020 with a lot of bad faith actors out there. And we have to really just show people that you have to be a bit skeptical. You have to verify. And if you are seeing information that's firing you up, that is getting an emotional reaction out of you, that's probably on purpose. And another way that I feel like a lot of our experts have been helpful throughout this year talking to our communities is a lot of these tactics are kind of the similar tactics that scammers use. If you're getting an unsolicited text message that you didn't sign up for, even if it's in good faith, even if it's from a campaign, even if it's from a nonprofit, that shouldn't be your first source of information and that you should verify and verify. If someone's really trying to rile you up about something, those are the same tactics that a lot of scammers do. So to really connect the dots between those efforts and what people are already aware of and know what to avoid. And the last thing I will say is that thankfully we've had some really good resources in Illinois when it comes to the Illinois State Board of Election and the Illinois Attorney General's office that have worked together not only to put together misinformation guides that have been helpful for us to distribute to voters and be at our community events, but also the Illinois State Board of Elections has a new reporting portal that you can report misinformation you see, and that's very helpful for social media too. The Illinois State Board of Elections has been a great resource for social media posts as well. And that way that all of the election authorities in Illinois, including Chicago, can use that because, we're a bit swamped at this moment and we're getting close to election day. So ultimately, the Illinois State Board of Elections has been a very helpful resource that we've leaned on and directed people to help report the misinformation that they're seeing.
Yes, sorry, I'm bumping Ami's compliments as well to the work that you guys are doing on social media. That actually allows me to ask you, Ami, because you're both a lawyer and working at a legal civil rights organization, what legal frameworks are in place to combat disinformation campaigns, and how effective have they been in protecting voters? And more broadly, how can lawyers assist in countering these challenges, given that one of the co-sponsors for this event is also the North American South Asian Law Students Association?
Thanks for the question. I'm going to go back 1 minute and say these social media posts, I think, are so helpful that the Illinois state and local election authorities have to demystify the process. I think that's kind of information people are hungry for right now, because I don't blame people these days if they have questions or doubts about our systems because of all of the rhetoric out there, but then we need to help by putting information into their hands, into our hands. So really grateful for those examples and that leadership. Another example, actually, that just came up in the last few minutes that we encountered, if someone called us at 866 our vote, another example of disinformation is a voter called us because they were very confused. They got a text that said, "Thank you for voting for," and then had a candidate's name in there. The voter got really worried about I guess it was a coincidence that they had just voted. And so they really got concerned that somehow someone obtained that information and texted them about it. it was just a coincidence. It's not like anyone actually knew how they voted, but that's how it felt to the voter. So trying to provide information to voters has been key for us. I know that sounds very simple. That is where we focused our energy on honing the correctness of our information, keeping an open mind, being willing to learn if we need to update our understanding of the law or of election processes. And so we really keep our focus there and feel that we're able to contribute some prevention or correction that way to the information that's out there. For example, on the Indiana side of our work, we have been providing information to nonpartisan civic organizations about a new Indiana law, and we've been explaining, I won't get into all the specifics of the law, but we've been explaining there's no documentary proof of citizenship required in Indiana because so many people are confused. They read articles or hear what politicians say in Indiana, and then they think there are some additional requirements that are not in place for the 2024 election, and then it prevents some people from even wanting to try to navigate the processes in the first place. So you've heard me talk about how we've really tried to keep an eye on providing thorough, accurate information in response to people's questions. And also, as far as what you specifically asked me about legal frameworks, I want to talk about that a little bit. There are more issues out there right now when it comes to the problems of misinformation or disinformation compared to there are not perfected systems yet to address them. I say this knowing there are many law students in the audience and watching the recording. This is a growing area of work. I think it's a good area of work for people in the legal profession to continue to refine. I think we have to unpack that there are some government systems intended to address the issues, and then they can differ in terms of their efficacy and maybe depending on the state or the level of government that it is. And different states have taken different approaches on whether there should be criminal penalties or not when it comes to some of these actions and misconduct. And I'm not even in this talk taking a position on that, but I think that there are some valid questions out there about how should this be addressed when there are harmful actors who are engaging in misinformation and disinformation. And there are some government actors who utilize law enforcement, but then who maybe in some instances at least use some discernment about how to go about that. And so we as Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights do try to take a problem solving approach and actually utilize a lot of non-legal tools even in trying to work through if there are instances of misinformation and disinformation. I know that that may not be a traditional legal way of trying to go about it, but we think it's important, and this is how we train our pro bono volunteers and staff to talk things through with interested parties like the voter or maybe a poll worker or election judge, narrate and document, take a moment to consider and report the facts to an attorney supervisor before rushing to judgment or having a preconceived notion of what's going on. Those are the sorts of ways that we think the strategies need to be in place to position ourselves for success when addressing these big problems. But we know there's still a lot more solutions to be determined.
Absolutely, especially given that there's so many cases that are still being litigated, and many of us wondered whether one of our nominees this year would be on certain ballots, given and seeing how those things have shaped out only in the last few months up until Election Day. That being said, for I think maybe just to spread the questions, we'll start with Jordan, but what should the role of news and communication organizations be in combating disinformation and misinformation? And often I think because most of our primary channels are in English, maybe not all of this material is getting to South Asian voters, even if there's a much stronger organization for example, many Spanish-speaking ethno-linguistic media.
Yeah, thanks so much. And I guess maybe just to absolve doubt. So misinformation is information that is incorrect, but is generally accidental. And disinformation is intentionally misleading the recipient of a message. And because we talk about both things together almost all the time, it's important for us just to bracket out and make sure that it's clear. And one of the things that looking at all of the developments in communication technologies and possibilities over the last 20 years, and certainly as long as there's been political campaigns, there's been attempts for mis and disinformation. So this is not a entirely new thing, but it is exacerbated by the ease of communication, the ease of connection that we have now. And everybody takes advantage of that, including bad actors or those who are intentionally misleading the public. And one of the reasons they can do that is a kind of lack of policy and regulation at higher levels. So we're still trying to figure out who is responsible when things go wrong. Facebook, as a for-profit organization that is not classified as a news organization, is not bound by the same either professional practices or ethics or, in fact, legal expectations as even a newspaper or a magazine or even television channel. And organizations, including Facebook and social media networks, use that to their advantage to sometimes escape and absolve themselves of duty or responsibility. And even if they don't explicitly say that they're not responsible, in any of the conversations or articles you read about how this organization was found out to be misleading the public on Facebook with their advertisements, almost always there's a message in there about the public needs to figure out for themselves. And unfortunately, with the media environment that we have, that's very, very hard. And as the freshmen who I teach, I teach 70 freshmen, and many of them are first time able to vote next week. And they have very basic kinds of questions, and they don't know where to go to find those answers. And so it's up to us as SAAPRI, for example, and other non-news organizations to fill in those gaps that maybe should be filled in by the news organizations themselves. And so while, yes, it is ultimately up to the citizen to figure out for themselves, it is doesn't excuse the news organization or the media company from complete responsibility or accountability. But again, without legal frameworks in place, doing it out of the goodness of their heart is kind of a hard sell sometimes.
If you could actually kind of continue through that, then what role might grassroots and advocacy groups play in safeguarding the electoral process? And could you share any examples of collaboration between community groups and the legal sector that you've witnessed? And Ami, you're welcome to lean in if something comes to mind as well.
Yeah, I think because we have the opportunity to communicate anything, anybody can kind of, if they have the message and they have the access, can promote materials. That means that those who want to educate in a positive way can do so as well. So SAAPRI has been engaged for the last year or so in a significant get out the vote, voter information and awareness campaign, along with many other organizations from different kinds of communities. And again, knowing that the community looks to us for so many things, whether it's advice, guidance, support for immigration or healthcare, then access to democracy and access to justice is another thing that we, as SAAPRI in particular, take very seriously. So we do act as a way to help the community find out ways to educate themselves about these issues.
Thank you.
I can add a little bit to that
Please.
as well. So in talking a little bit more about collaboration between community groups and the legal sector, thankfully with the work that I and my team members get a chance to do, there are many instances where lawyers can be helpful in collaborating with community groups, such as if a community member was facing intimidation at a polling place and a legal volunteer could show up and in coordination with that community group, speak to someone who's asserting authority in the polling place to help set the record straight about what the law requires. That's something that plays out several times during the course of an election. But I'm actually going to answer in another way too, that, again, keeping in mind law students are taking this in. Lawyers are not always helpful. Lawyers can be unhelpful, and we're very conscious of that, including in our training of pro bono attorneys and staff when there are going to be a bunch of lawyers out there on election day. And the training really is key in our experience. Ideally, the training should be co-led by organizations who work on the ground very directly with groups of voters, because the more distanced we get from that experience that voters have and community members have, then the law only matters so much when it comes to election law, for example. How it plays out in practice is a lot more relevant than what the letter of the law says. And so when we work with community organizations, we get a sense of where they would like us to be, where they have it covered, but maybe want us to be available on the phone or email if a question comes up. So it's, not, we shouldn't in the legal profession rush to judgment that we necessarily are helpful in this. We feel that it can be most strategic to be led by community organizations closest to the issues and community experiences. And that's what we learn in our legal profession, right? That we should be driven by what a client asks of us and what their goals are. And whether it's a formal client or someone who we're collaborating with more informally, I think that still holds as far as we have to unlearn some of the aspects of being an attorney or being in the legal profession. And a lot of times just step back and be a better listener to what we're even being asked to do and be not rush to judgment about how we can necessarily contribute if there's a problem going on.
You actually answered the next question, which is great. And I'm going to have Max put his thoughts here as well, which is what steps can local election boards, the other side of it was legal advocates, take to build or rebuild trust in the electoral process, particularly among communities that feel disenfranchised?
Well, this is a great question. I think the broad answer is that we have to put in the work and we have to put in the work together. And that has to be a commitment that we take seriously. And I'm very thankful that I'm on this call with many people that we work on a daily basis at this point. But, even when there's off years at the election, I also think it's important that public servants like myself have a thick skin when it comes to elections and this process. When there is an issue or a complaint or a valid emergency in a community, we have to respond to it rather than not fearing a bad PR or a rough meeting. I know that many people on this call too, Ami, we've had some tense meetings in the past because we have to deal with these issues in real time and not run away from them. I will say, thankfully, I think that this is also why it's helpful to have independent election agencies. The Chicago Board of Election Commissioners is not an elected position. They're appointed by the Circuit Court of Chicago, a Circuit Court of Cook County. And I think that that's important because we're not necessarily tied to an elected official. We don't have someone who is necessarily needing to be elected every 2 or 4 years or reacting to PR. Elections are something that are very complicated, and as much as we really try to create a perfect system, are still run by humans and can never be an absolutely perfect system. So this is why we have the community relationships that we do and working with the legal groups that we do, so we can really try to perfect it as the most we can. And for our voters, just make sure that they're entering a safe, a secure, a welcoming environment, that we really put the effort into reaching people where they're at. And I think when it comes to the South Asian community, it comes to many of our communities where English isn't the first language, we've really tried to expand and work hard on that since 2020 as well. And so we do have a bi-monthly meeting with many different language access organizations through the city. They're bringing us good ideas. Often before an election, we're running around, we're working 18 or 20-hour days, we're not feeling our most creative. It was really many of the communities that brought to our attention the need for signage at our early voting sites and our precinct polling places when a bilingual election official is there or an election judge. If we're going through all the work to recruit these bilingual election judges and these early voting officials, then we got to make people aware that they're there. But these are the type of things that sometimes can fall through the cracks and that we work with our community organizations with to go, huh, that's a good idea. Why don't we work on that? We'll create a friendly signage that identifies the person on site, that says hello, both in English and the language that the site is covered. This is just an example of the type of work that we undertake with our advocate groups and our language access groups, because this is what builds trust, but it's also good for us. It's good creative energy, and it helps us fill gaps that we might not have been aware of just by going through the day-to-day work of being an election authority.
As we begin to work our way towards the latter closing portion of this, I think we're now going to move towards sort of just the urgency of today being Friday and Tuesday being the last day that people can put in their votes. So the question at hand here is if, and it's going to be for Ami, if a voter experiences or witnesses voter suppression or encounters disinformation, what resources are available to them, and what steps should they take to ensure their concerns are being addressed?
We want to make sure that anyone feels comfortable calling the National Nonpartisan Election Protection Coalition. Our hotline is 866-OUR-VOTE, 866-OUR-VOTE, and there are companion lines for other languages, including 888-API-VOTE for many Asian languages. There are Spanish and Arabic hotlines as well. We have people answering the calls live for long hours all throughout early voting, and even longer hours on November 5th. If someone got voicemail, that's unlikely to happen because of the long hours, but if someone did call in the middle of the night and got our voicemail, they can leave a message and they would get a call back promptly. And that's not the only source of help or information, and local election authorities have a wealth of information as well. And I wanted to share with you the source that is the top of mind for me because it's the apparatus that we've been working on. And our organization where I work, Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, is the team that's answering calls live from Illinois and Indiana voters on November 5th. And then we have a partnership with our national organizations until then. So just wanted to unpack a little bit what our operation is. We've been getting a lot of calls even in early voting, and I'm really proud of the information we've been able to provide community members, and we will continue to do that. Sometimes it's as, excuse me, sometimes it's as quick as information we provide them about where can they go to vote, what do they need to bring with them, if anything, and sometimes it's just very straightforward and a quick answer to their call. And then other times it may be more involved where they may be looking for some help and following up with the local election authority, or it may be a lot of people calling about a particular polling place that's closing up early or something like that. So the experiences could vary in terms of the length of time someone would need to stay on, just depending on what's going on and how we can best help them immediately. And so encourage people to, whomever you call, whether it's us or another source of information, to just not hold back in asking questions you may have, because it's not dumb to have a question about our election procedures. It's very understandable that people have questions in these times.
That's great. And so you can all take maybe 1 minute or 1 to 2 minutes to answer this closing question before Simi shares some questions that have been sent in from South Asian law students. So looking ahead to the 2024 election, which is to say, the days that remain, but also I think things that are you're flagging from what you've seen that'll become relevant for 2026 midterms or even 2028 and our next go at this. What are the most urgent priorities for your organizations in ensuring a free, fair, and secure election for all communities? And Max, I think we can start with you.
Well, thank you. Well, I'm going to start with what all government agencies are going to tell you is the solution to any issue, which is more money and more staff. But the truth of the matter is that we have more and more complicated election laws and more laws that are passed every single year, but our budgets both at the federal, the state, and the local level for election authorities have not been growing. And that is a challenge, especially when there's so much more that we have to work together on, and especially all of what we were discussing when it came to mis and disinformation. So elections have been evolving, but our budgets have not. So I feel this is an important thing if you can help advocate or when you're having conversations with elected officials or legislators. This is something that helps us. We are looking for a full-time staff member for Korea, a full-time staff member for Tagalog. These are things that we put forward to Chicago City Council and hope to get funded for one day. Our election judges need a raise. We need more early voting sites. I think a lot of the conversation right now is we're seeing lines and people are getting used to those hour-long or even 2-hour-long lines at some of our north side locations. We could use more sites and we could use more funding when it came to there. But we're also needing to move and continue into the 21st century. So a lot of our focus is meeting voters where they're at. And so working on a Chicago Board of Elections app where people are on their smartphones, something that they don't have to sign into every single time to look up their voter information, something where we can put push notifications to people, things that we can more actively be where people are at online and on their phones is a good idea too. And while I've got the mic, I do want to give a shout out to someone I know is watching right now, but I know many members have worked with Kimi Mehta, who is our South Asian Community Service Representative here at the board. A lot of her work has been extraordinarily essential in ensuring a smooth election day for our South Asian voters, but she works so directly one-on-one with them too. And this is exactly why we need to expand these roles, I think, within election authorities across our state, to have people that are dedicated to doing this work year-round rather than a temporary hire or relying just on a community organization for these type of organizing or translation skills. So I think Kimi just serves as another great example of the futures of elections look like people who do this work full time, that we have the proper funding for it, and that we're able to create these good community relationships. So we're not just a buttoned up government agency that is not responding to people, that isn't working with folks out in the community. These are the type of solutions I think that will be helpful moving forward into the future after this election.
That's wonderful. And so we actually have 3 questions from the audience, which I'm going to now use to initially direct towards Jordan, because he interfaces with the college students, both at the undergraduate level and graduate level, the most. So the first question that we have that's been sent in by an NASALSA member is, how have voting and non-voting student engagement patterns changed since the last election? And feel free to, just respond based on your casual observance. But if you want to, if you have something very formal to share, that's welcome too.
Sure. Yeah. I guess before that, just kind of to jump back about
Please.
the idea of language access,
Yes.
which again goes into what we talked about in just a couple minutes also. And as we all know, South Asians and South Asian Americans have featured very prominently in this presidential election cycle. And that is a reflection of the growing South Asian American population, period. And with the population that's growing, there's going to be a segment of the population who doesn't have a lot of proficiency in English. And so the more places, more opportunities that those who have a lower English proficiency can still exercise their right to vote by education campaigns. And as Max mentioned, just the opportunity to have a place to go and vote is one of the biggest things that we can all work together in a very nonpartisan way. And the idea that things are changing, and many of my students and college students who I've observed are excited about the opportunity to vote. So while they may not be excited about a candidate or a policy, they are excited that they can be a part of something that they've been told most of their lives is something to be a part of. And as I mentioned about with dis and misinformation, they don't really know what they need to know, and they don't know, again, the kinds of questions they need to ask. But I think that they are all very hopeful about their opportunity to vote because they've now seen or think they've seen or heard what happens when you do not vote. And so there's a lot more kind of peer-to-peer kind of encouragement about the voting process, which I think also is more important because, as I mentioned, the usual institutions that provide information about electoral politics and voting aren't really doing the job that they used to do or should be doing now.
Sorry, there we go. I think that allows for sort of a continuation of that thread from another NASALSA student for Max, which is, do you have any suggestions on how universities and graduate schools can better help their student voter engagement, whether that's on-campus voting or on-campus registration, etc.?
This is a great question because really, if you're a college student, you have two choices. Are you registered where you're at, if you're not living in the city where your college is located, or do you want to get registered within your new location? So if you are registered out of state or another place, you can certainly keep that registration. You are temporarily at college. In those cases, what you're generally going to be requesting is a vote by mail ballot. Now, every different state and every election jurisdiction has a little bit of different rules, and some are more stricter than others. And that can be a very hard thing to communicate to a lot of college students. So I think the best advice for a lot of college organizations is to direct people to do it sooner rather than later, is research your vote by mail options and your local voting options if you are still voting in your original jurisdiction. Now, if you want to get registered, say here in Chicago, then that's pretty easy. So that is something that happens on our college campuses a lot. We have student registration drives. You just have to be in your dorm room or your apartment for more than 30 days to register under that address. And you can use same-day registration too. We have a lot of college students that are using same-day registration leading up to this presidential election. We also have many different active organizations. We have a university early voting program in the city of Chicago. Currently, that's 3 universities that have a temporary early voting site at their college. It's today's last day. It wraps up at 5 o'clock. That's at Chicago State University, Northeastern Illinois University, and University of Chicago. And they've had 3 days where they've had a temporary early voting site. That's all just because the local students have organized and brought that there. They've worked with us. They found an appropriate space room. They helped, get all the approvals from their college. Those are student led, and those have been locations that have served as temporary early voting sites for the last 4 cycles in a row. We're also happy to say that many colleges are also just serving as full-time ward early voting sites. That's UIC, that's Northeastern Illinois University again, it's El Centro. So if you are a college student and you are interested in bringing voting to your campus or bringing your precinct polling place closer to your campus, get in touch with us. We'd like to work with you. This is something where we really get active with students that come to us prepared. So I will say it's a difference of saying that, well, this is something that we want and I'm just going to ask it. And I think that you should just send this to us. It's a bit of an organizing effort. We need, to as much given back to us for us to follow through on this. And but we are here to work with you. If you'd like to see an early voting site, a temporary one on campus, or any other voter registration drives, we can certainly do voting machine demonstrations, or if your college wants to serve as an early voting site in the future. So these are the type of things that ultimately we can work with college students on, but I think students should be focusing on when they're reaching voters on their campus is asking, where are you registered? Do you want to stay registered there? Do you want to be registered here? Now let's get you educated about your voting options.
Lovely. And that actually brings us to our last question before I pass it back to the SAAPRI team, which is for Ami, which is, do you have any suggestions on how, oh, I'm so sorry. Whoop. Nope. Sorry. The question is, would making Election Day a national holiday help voter engagement or voter turnout? And I will share, I work at a nonprofit as my full-time job. The South Asian Legal Defense Fund is something that's volunteer-led right now, but that we're actively building. And my nonprofit organization, my employer, does give us a day off. So I'm very lucky, but that's not the case for everybody.
That's great. Well, that's actually a great segue to my answer of that's going to be a little bit of a waffling type answer. So I think that if employers give maximum flexibility to their people, that is the best case scenario. Some states' laws require or encourage that, some do not have any kind of provision for that, and it's more of a free-for-all. But I think it's that flexibility that we really need. And even when there are state policies, even when there are policies like state or national holidays, we have seen that certain classes of workers don't necessarily have the option to be relieved of their work. And so it will help some people to be more engaged or turn out if there is a national holiday or a state or local holiday, and it won't make a practical impact for some families. And so what I would encourage is to not see it as a miracle solution. And I am always willing to hear out communities if they have thoughts about whether that would help in their particular community or neighborhood, for example, depending on the types of jobs and worker categories that are at play. It may relieve someone of work that day and it may not. Many of our functions in our society keep churning even on holidays. And so those are some of the groups that I think about to say, well, it depends on what kind of engagement we're seeking and from whom. So we need many different solutions at the same time. I tend to think that the national holiday on its own is not enough, but always willing to hear community members out on that. And, you know, I do want to go back a little bit to talking about urgent priorities in ensuring inclusive elections, because I like to hear that there's brainstorming going on. You know, even whoever posed the question about the holiday, I think we all should be putting our creative thinking caps on about what could help to improve voting conditions for all of our communities. We don't even all have to have the exact same opinion on what kind of policies could help, but we certainly need to go in a direction of being more inclusive and engaging in our elections. The federal legal protections in that domain have eroded over time, and it is a challenging landscape for voting rights and elections. And so there's a lot of opportunity, especially on the state and local level, for these conditions to improve. But it means that we all really need to be hands-on involved in bringing about those changes that need to happen.
Thank you so much to all three of you. I'll actually pass it back to Shobana to give a formal closeout.
Thank you, Shivani, Simi, and our expert panelists for joining our roundtable on election protection and combating misinformation and disinformation that we come across on a daily basis. I understand everyone is busy as we are in the final stretch before the election. I really appreciate that you were able to make time to share your insights with us today. Your expertise and passion made the conversation really valuable, and the info and resources we were able to share here today will definitely help build trust and ensure that voters feel comfortable participating in the electoral process. To our attendees who were able to tune in live today and our future listeners, I wanted to share a quick reminder. Election Day is just around the corner. It's on Tuesday, November 5th. If you haven't voted early, please make sure to vote soon. If you're voting by mail, remember to mark your ballot and mail it back or drop it off in a secure drop box in a sealed, signed ballot envelope so that it is postmarked no later than Election Day. If you have voted already, let's take it a step further. Help at least 3 friends or family members come up with their own voting plans if they don't have one, and help them get their voices heard. You can sign up to be a poll worker or provide language access to limited English proficient voters at the polling place. Together, we can make a real difference. If you would like to connect with SAAPRI and would like to follow our work, you can visit our website, saapri.org, or email us at saapri@saapri.org. Thank you.